As always, it's an honor to be in front of you. Come on, Chris. We are in the middle of our missions month, and I thought this morning I was going to have to get up and give a heartfelt plea to you, but I can get up and give a heartfelt thank you instead, because you have picked all the names from our Prayer Pals ministry have been picked, and we are done with that. Now, we are done with that phase. Now the phase of pray for those kids. Reach out to those kids, encourage those kids, okay? So if you took one of those stars or a couple of those stars with those names on them, right, at the very least be praying for those kids. I hope that prayer is a part of, as James was talking about, is a prayer part of your regular life. Well, I'm asking you to add one more name or a couple more names, right? That's all we're asking to that prayer list. But it'd be even better if you can get to know those kids a little bit. And if you need any help with that, our children's ministry ladies would love to help you with that. Or Tim and the youth group, one of the youth deacons would love to help you get to know these kids. And I still need to get to know my kid, Everly. I don't know if the Kirks are here, but I still need to get to know one of my kids. I already know one of them because he's dating my daughter. So just happened to draw him for some reason. That's like 3 years in a row, too. All right, not him. It's kind of a weird trend that's happening. So we're here in the middle of our missions month, actually towards the end now, and that next week will be our last week. And just, again, another reminder that our entire contribution next week will go to all of our missions efforts. So I hope that you've already thought about that, prayed about that you've talked in your family. What can we give towards this effort? What can we put towards this in our budget? And if you're saying, I don't have a budget, then you better be at the financial seminar in October so you can learn how to do a budget, so you can learn how to be generous, right? That is just one of the keys to generosity, is if you don't know how much money you're spending on everything else, and how are you going to be able to give to God? So anyway, so those two things are connected. But I hope that you've already purposed in your heart what that amount is, and then you'll add a little bit more, and you'll give next week above and beyond so that we can really support so many of these important missions around the world and here locally as well. Really proud of the generosity of this church. But as we have talked about becoming missional, actually, will you help me with this real quick? Make sure we get on that. There we go. As we talk about being missional this month, as soon as I started thinking about that topic, Chris and Jill came to my mind. And I started thinking, at the very least, I need to have a conversation with them and talk to them about what it was like to be missionaries. We talked last week about how God has called and sent us into the world as missionaries. Well, these are two people who took their family to Nicaragua, and I always butcher that a little bit, but took their family to a foreign country because they felt the calling of God. And so Chris and I had lunch the other day, and of course Chris and I, we know each other pretty well at this point, but we hadn't talked a lot about that, actually, and so it was really good to get that. But what I wanted, as he and I talked, I thought, you know what, y'all need to hear what he has to say. He and Jill have been amazing servants here in our congregation for our youth and in so many other ways. And so beyond what they did down in Nicaragua, they have just been amazing servants here, and I'm so grateful for them. And thank you, Chris, for joining me. Just to start off, would you tell us a little bit about the brief history of y'all's time in Nicaragua, and specifically how y'all got that calling to want to go and do that?
So when we talked, we went through a whole gambit of things. When we went on a short-term mission trip when we moved down here in 2008. So I'd say 2010 we went on a short-term trip, and it was just like the one we just did. It was a bunch of us went, and it was like getting hit by a Mack truck. It was like, okay, I realize this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I actually feel like I'm living for God. Everything I'm doing is relying upon Him, and that was just for 1 week, and it was, we did the same kind of stuff we did just a few months ago, and I fell in love with it, and I didn't have a missionary degree or anything like that, so I talked to Benny Baker, who's the director of the mission down there, and he's like, if this is something you want to do, try find a need and build a plan. And so that's what we did. A family of us came back, 3 families, the Hennigers and the Browns and our family accounts, and we put a plan together. And within, it wasn't too long, I guess it was a year or so after that, I can't remember, we moved. And we moved down and we were going to do animal husbandry, like teaching how to raise goats and things like that. And so that's how we got there.
All right. So you and I talked about, and you just mentioned, you had a plan. You had some expectations for how this was going to go. But of course, very little goes the way you plan in life. So what changes did you have to make to become an effective missionary in that setting? What kind of things did, and not just the tactics, but also how did God change you?
So, if you're being missionally minded and if you're looking for problems, if you're a problem solver, you're looking for problems. So, we had a problem, and we bought goats, and we were teaching people. We did all this stuff with goats. It was chickens and goats and chickens and goats, and the goats were dying. And we finally got to a point like, okay, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And the person that we were working with, he was a preacher, and we were helping his community. And he's like, they don't have time. And you're like, what? You're just kind of like, I don't understand. And he's like, well, they don't even have clean water. They don't even have clean sanitation. Like, taking care of these, you're asking them to do something that doesn't, like they have other needs that they need to take care of before they can take care of that.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that that's wrong. It's just they have to be more focused on over here, on caring for their families. And they're like, okay, so how can we help them? And clean water was, that's the first thing you should fix. If you can fix anything for anybody, is make sure they have clean water, and then something to sleep under, and you just kind of
build from there, right?
You build from there, and so we had to pivot. We pivoted everything. We pivoted the animal husbandry, all of that, and we pivoted to water. And so the animal husbandry gave us an opportunity to get into people's homes and to get to know people. So how do we do that with water and do it in a way that's going to be quick? Because now we're pivoting. We've got people thinking we're doing one thing, so we have to come up with a good plan. And so we pivoted to the water filters, and that was the right thing to do. I mean, God's going to move you on your path. It might not be the one that you think that you should be doing, but He's going to make sure that one. Okay, He's going to move you in a way that fits and is natural.
So it's not like he shut that door, made that obvious. That's not where you need to be, even though that's what you had gone to do.
That's right.
And if you had stuck with that, if you had been stubborn in that.
Right. If we had been stubborn in it, I think it would have just wound up being a business. Because then you're just going to be doing it for profit.
Yeah. So as you just said, and in our conversation, you guys focused your mission on the needs of the people. Mm-hmm. What did they need? Finding the problems or the needs of the people around you. How did that then open up opportunities for them to hear, and I think more specifically, see the gospel of Jesus Christ?
So our situation is kind of different than a lot of missionaries, because the mission that we were affiliated with was large enough to, as you guys know, they take in groups. So during the summer, there were tons of groups that came down. I mean, we would have hundreds and hundreds of North Americans come in all summer long. And so you have that mission field, and then you have the Nicaraguan mission field. So you have two fields that you deal with. And being an English-speaking person, that doesn't speak Spanish very well. I'm not Nicaraguan, so I don't know the culture very well. So for me to think that I'm going to go in and preach the gospel to this person almost arrogant in my opinion, because you'd have to know their culture, you'd have to live there, you'd have to be a Nicaraguan to understand a Nicaraguan. And so the way we looked at it is, so how do we help the preachers? How do we help the local preachers get to know people? So that's why we went with an individual water filter per home, and then we would train the preachers to do checks and how to fix them and repair the water filters.
Okay.
So they would do the follow-up check on the water filter, and they would bring a Bible, and they would ask them, hey, can I pray for you? Do you know Jesus? And hey, can I show you something in the book of John? That's always where they always started. They always started in the book of John. And it gave them an opportunity, because they know people. Nicaragua's a small country, and this area is small, so you're going to know somebody that knows somebody. Everybody's connected somehow. So help the preachers build relationships and give them an in. Is how do you get the in for the people that need to help facilitate that?
Yeah. And I would imagine that because you guys had come in to meet a need without asking anything, that there was a trust level, there was the beginning of a relationship in many ways was formed that just opened them up even more, I would imagine, right?
Yeah. The relationships I don't know how many churches have stemmed from this one project and just working in what we call El Campo. That's just the country is what it is. And it's over 10, I believe, that they have been planted because they were able to go into a community and walk around and get to know the leaders of those communities. And then those guys would say, okay, well, we've got these filters here. And they would just, they're all connected now through these filters. And that's the beauty of it.
Awesome. So you guys have obviously been back here, home, for several years now. What I wanted to ask you was, how do you continue to be missional in life back here, in your, back home, so to speak? Because I know you didn't lose that heart for missions. So how did that translate to being back here? Because that's what's going to matter to a lot of us.
I think that asking God to open your eyes every day to those around you that are in need is what we should be doing. It's not comfortable, and it's not going to be. It's never comfortable when you're not doing things for yourself. And just your coworker. If you can tell that your coworker's having a bad day, go say something. Don't ignore them. Just go say something. We talked the other day when we had lunch, and how many of us actually do anything when you see the guy on the side of the road with a road sign? Do you assume he's just a drug addict and he's just begging for money, or do you think, hey, this guy really needs some help? Well, he probably needs some help, regardless if he's a drug addict. So, and that's just a mindset. It's just, don't make your heart cold.
Okay.
To people who need. Don't be cold. Jesus wasn't cold. He was cold to the people that thought that they were right. That's the only time he got cold on people.
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about. And being missionally minded is just having your eyes open. Look for the problem. And I get it. We're all just individual people. You're not going to solve world hunger. You might, but but what can you do to help world hunger?
Yeah.
Just be a fraction of the solution.
Yeah. And I'm sure even down in Nicaragua, those people needed more than water, right? But that was the first step. and because without that, nothing else mattered. But
Yeah.
you weren't going to go down there and solve all their problems,
Right.
but you could do what you could.
David gets up and talks about water mission and all the people that in this world that need water. And
2 billion.
there's billions, but with a B, that don't have clean water. And then expound that on health. And the greatest killer in the world is dehydration.
Yeah.
Like, we don't think of that. We just walk up to a faucet and clean water comes out. Like clean water, let alone the water. It's clean water.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I want to finish with something I want to ask him something he told me, and I want you guys to hear it. Tell me about the prayer that you said when your family was getting on the plane. I think it was in Atlanta, right? Going to Nicaragua.
There's two.
Okay.
There's two prayers.
Okay.
I can do both.
Tell me both. Tell us both.
I didn't warn Jill about this one.
Nah.
I think it was 2007, 2006, in that time frame. Jill and I both, we were going to a mega church at the time. Church of Christ in Maryland was pretty weak, and we were being more fulfilled at another church. But we were being moved by God. Like we knew it. We knew God was moving in our lives, and we were just passionate. And we just didn't know what to do, and so we prayed one night. God, just use us. We want you to use us for the betterment of your kingdom. We want to be the tools in your hand, and we just guide us and move us. And we prayed that prayer. And if you know me, I like to crack a joke usually, and when things get sensitive. And I looked and I just kind of rolled over and said, well, I guess we're moving to Africa. Because that was a bit, I knew that was initially, I knew that we were headed that direction. Like, it just the prayer that we had prayed just meant, okay, you're going to be uncomfortable. Like, something's about to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
2 years later, we moved here. And then within a year and a half of that, we had moved to Nicaragua. And I remember sitting on the plane. We did the whole thing. We raised the funds. We traveled the country. We went to all the people that we knew in churches that we knew, and we raised our funds. But the day was here that we had to get on the plane. We bought the tickets and we packed up the stuff. We sold the house. We'd done everything. We were still short financially. And I had my son sitting next to me, and I'm sitting on an American airline, and we're sitting on the tarmac, and I just, we're wheeling down, and I'm just like, God, I know you got this. I have to have you.
Yeah.
I have to have you. And that prayer changed everything, because from then on, if you've ever done anything like this, your funds aren't, you don't have a job, you're not getting a paycheck. And so you might get $500 one week, you're $50 the next week. You just don't know how it's going to come in. And, it would be a Tuesday, and we'd be like, okay, we got to watch. We got to have we got to watch it for this week, because we don't have a lot for, we're eating Vienna sausages and crackers. And, by the end of the week, you had to check that you needed to cover what you needed. And it happened time and time again. Time and time again. And the only thing I can attribute it to is when you get uncomfortable for God, he really pays attention. He wants you to not be comfortable. And I know that sounds crazy, but he really wants you to be uncomfortable for him.
Yeah.
Because that's when you learn who you are.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you, man. Love you. You help me with the podium?
You gotta preach him down here.
Absolutely. Thank you, buddy. All right, LCY, I wanted to have Chris up here. and to have that dialogue in front of y'all so that y'all could hear what I had heard the other day and what I've heard from Chris so many times. So to pull this all together, we talked last week as we started talking about being missional, this idea of what God has done since the beginning of time, right? That he has called people to himself out of the world. He's given them a mission and a purpose, as he did with Chris and Jill, right? They opened themselves up to God knowing that, hey, who knows what's about to come down the pike, right? And God called them out, and then what did he do? He sent them, right? We saw this in John 17. Jesus said, sanctify them, Lord, by your word, right? Sanctify is to call out, to separate, to make holy. And then he says in the very next verse, now I'm sending them out as you have sent me. So this calling and sending. But the reality is we think of missionaries, it's so easy for us to think of a missionary that way, but we're that too. We're now the called out and the sent, right? And if you're going all the way to Nicaragua, to South America, then it's easy to think of being sent. Like I said last week, it's hard sometimes for us to think of being sent because I'm just going to all the places I've always gone. I'm going to the same old job, the same stores, the same home, right? And yet, because God has called us out and given us that mission, now when we go, we are sent. We have a different purpose and a different mission. And so when I go to the store, and I think this is what Chris is saying, this mindset, right, has to change. That when I go about my errands throughout the day, I'm not just doing what I want to do. God is sending me. God is putting me in places where he wants me. And if I have opened myself up to him and said, God, use me, then he's also going to put opportunities and people in those places that I can serve, that I can look out for the problems or the needs that they have. If I'll open my eyes and understand that I'm not just going about my business, I'm being sent by God to do what he wants. But we also talked last week about how important it is for us to understand our otherness than the world. Again, for a missionary in a foreign country where they may not speak the language as well and they don't understand all the customs and cultures, it's easy to feel as a foreigner because you literally are. But yet we here in America, sometimes we forget that we're also called to be foreigners and strangers. Jesus says, they're not of this world, my believers, any more than I am of this world. And that has to be the reality for us. Unfortunately, like we've seen so often as our culture has shifted, what's happened is so many Christians have shifted with it. They've left the truth of God behind to be more comfortable in this world. And so they've shifted with it. Churches have done the same thing. Whole churches have shifted with the culture. As the culture begins to move away, they move away with it instead of standing their ground on the gospel of Jesus Christ, on the truth of God. And let me tell you, if we're going to shift with culture, then we're not the others. We're not the foreigners that we think we are. And it's hard. How can you call something to someone a different life if you don't live a different life already? Right? We've got to live a different life than those around us. And so we've got to be different, and we've got to believe in what Jesus is saying here, that we are different as he is different. So we are the called out, we are the sent, we are the other. But I think we also see so clearly what Jesus wants us in this mission that he has for us. We see it so clearly in Matthew chapter 10. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus sends out the 12 apostles. These men who have been his students, right? He's been their rabbi and their teacher, and he's been molding them and shaping them. They've been witnessing his ministry around. And now he says, okay, guys, now it's time for you to go out and to be sent to the community around us. And so he sends them out in pairs, which is very intentional, obviously. He does not send them alone. And there's a whole list of instructions that he gives, but in verse 7 and 8, it's really crystallized in these two verses. First of all, Jesus says in verse 7, as you go, proclaim this message, the kingdom of heaven has come near. So he tells them, I want you to proclaim. When you go out, you have to speak, you have to preach, you have to proclaim. But here's the message, the kingdom of heaven is near, which was the same message he had been proclaiming. He just gave them his message. And he said, I want you to go out and you've got to open your mouth and you've got to speak to people. And you've got to declare the truth of God, that something is happening right now. Man, I can't imagine how exciting it would have been to live in that time. As Jesus is literally on earth and his kingdom is being fashioned at that time. It's invading the world How exciting that must have been. But he said, you've got to go out and you've got to proclaim. And we need to be able to do the same. Not all of us are preachers, I get that. But we have to be able to speak the gospel into the lives of those around us. We have to be able to do that. A simple way that we can do that, because I don't know when the opportunity is going to come to you. But if you can, at the very least, answer this question, why are you a Christian? Why have you put your faith in God? If you can answer that to someone in a succinct way, if you can tell them, here's why I'm a Christian, and not because mommy and daddy are, or because that's generations of, but really deep down, why? Why do you believe what you believe? If you can do that, that right there is a great opening to start talking to someone about the gospel of Jesus Christ. You don't have to know the Bible forward and backwards. You don't have to memorize verses. It'd be great if you did, right? That's a great thing for all of us to do. But you don't have to be a Bible expert. You don't have to be able to, we've got some people who can do that. But can you answer those simple questions? What I would often do when someone would come to me, especially as a chaplain, every once in a while I'd have someone come to me and they say, hey chaps, why do you go to church? And I would say, well, that's not a bad question. But I would tell them, can I answer this question instead? Can I tell you why I have a relationship with God? And they're, well, why is that what's the difference? I said, oh, there's a difference. Right? Let me tell you why I have a relationship with God. Because at the end of the day, that's why I go to church. But it's more important for me to talk about that. And if you haven't thought about that and practiced that maybe, right? I challenge you to do that. Practice answering that question to somebody. Get in front of your mirror, right? Maybe you're driving down the road. I talk to myself in the car all the time, right? Nowadays I know people just think I'm talking on the phone, so I don't care, right? I know that they're not looking at the crazy guy. They're like, oh, he must be on the phone. So it doesn't bother me anymore. But practice that. Why am I a Christian? Here's why, in a succinct way. So he told them to preach. But what does he tell them to do in the next verse? Not just preach. He says this, he goes, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Freely you have received, freely give. Jesus told them, go do the things I've been doing. So he said, I want you to preach the gospel, and then I want you to show them the gospel. Preach the kingdom of God, and then show them what the kingdom of God does in the lives of those who enter into it. Show them. Now, you may say, well, that's great, Lynn. I can't heal the sick. I can't raise the dead. I can't do any of those things. Well, no one could either at that time. In fact, these men couldn't do it except for the fact that in the beginning of chapter 10, Jesus gave them the authority to do so. Jesus delegated his authority over these things, over demons and death and sickness. He delegated it over to them and said, I'm giving you the authority to do the things that I have done for those around you. But don't worry about the miracles. That's not the point. The point is what he says at the end. Freely you have been given, freely give. Whatever God has given you, whatever God has given you, whatever ability, whatever talent, whatever passion, whatever possession, whatever God has given you, that's what you give. He's not saying give something you don't have. He's saying give something you have been given. And God has given each and every one of us something that someone else needs. And he will continue. The beautiful thing about the Bible is the more we give, the more we receive. So that we can give more. So that we'll receive more, so that we can give more. Right? That's how God works. But he says, whatever it is you have. So if you don't have much, then God is not asking you to give a lot. He's asking you to give what you've received. And we've all been given something. This is what God asks us to do. To preach the word, yes, to speak about the word, to preach the gospel in the kingdom, but also to show people what the kingdom looks like by the way that we meet their needs. Because when we do that, what happens is we show them who God really is. And let me tell you, if we're not going to live the gospel, then I'd rather you not preach the gospel. I really would. I'd rather you not preach it if you're not going to live it. And I'm not saying live it perfectly. Not a single one of us is going to do that. But if we're not going to love people, then why are we going to bring the name of Jesus into anywhere if we're not going to love those people first? And that's what we've got to do. And that's what Jesus was asking of his apostles. Love people, proclaim the gospel, show them what it means. You know, there's a lot of things said about how we get into heaven, but Jesus tells a very succinct, I want to say story, but it's not a story, because he's literally telling us what that day is going to be like. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells us what the day is going to be like when he judges the world. Right? He says that all the nations will be gathered unto him, every single human being, and all he's going to do is he's going to separate them. As a shepherd separates the goats to the left and the sheep to the right, he's going to separate every human being who's ever lived. And when he says that, he says you're going to come into what the kingdom that you belong to, right? Because it's your inheritance. You're going to come into what belongs to you. And you're going to enter into that kingdom that's been prepared for you since the beginning of time. And he says, here's why you get to come into my kingdom. Because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was tired, right? Or sorry, I better go ahead and read it. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. When I needed clothes, you clothed me. When I was sick, you looked after me. And when I was in prison, you visited me. He doesn't say, come into the kingdom because of all those baptisms you did, or all those times that you preached the gospel to people, or all those people you converted into Christianity. Not that that's not important. I'm not saying that. Jesus obviously told us in the Great Commission to baptize and make disciples of all the world. But here he is at the end of time judging the goats and the sheep. And he says, the reason you belong in my kingdom now is because you gave what I gave you to others. You saw the problem, you saw the need, and you gave. Is he asking us to give anything crazy in that list? No. Food, a drink of water, your time, your energy, your presence. That's all he's asking. But what happens when we start doing that? When we start giving that to people, is they open themselves up to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because we have decided to put flesh on the gospel, right? Christ called us not to just preach the gospel, but to live it, to embody it, and to display it to the world. To preach it with our words, but to preach it even louder with our actions. And again, if we're not going to do that, then don't preach it with your mouth. We need to live it first. Jesus came to put flesh on God, right? He came incarnate, the Bible tells us, in the flesh, to show us what it's like to live life. And now we are that. We put the flesh on God's love to people so that when we love them, they're seeing not us, but the love of God. That is how we need to live our lives. That is the heart of being missional, is opening our eyes. And so this week, all I would ask of you this week is that you pray for opportunities for God to open your eyes to those around you. Open your eyes to see the needs that God already has in your life. They're already there. He's not going to have to create them. There's already people in your lives who need what you have, what God has given you. People that I can't reach, right? People that Tim can't reach, or Don Allen, or any of our shepherds. People that only you can love because of where God has put you and where he has sent you. This morning, we have the opportunity to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, not just in our words, but with our lives and with our actions and with our behavior and with everything we are. And if you have not put Christ on in baptism and believed on him as the Son of God and the Savior of the world, then now is the time. Now is the time to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ so that you can have that promise of salvation, the promise of heaven. But if you need prayers this morning, if you need help in any way, whatever, if we can be missional to you today, if you need prayers and help and kindness this morning, we are here for you. If you'll come as we stand and as we sing.